Hello everybody and welcome to this unboxing. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Diemension Games Celestial Episode 1, The Hidden Void. Now, before we kick into this, it is a prototype, so some things may be subject to change. Not every component will probably be in its final form here, although I will say the miniatures are pretty banged on, so I don't think they're going to be changing much. But if you want to take a look at some, not all, but some of what you get in the Hidden Void, let's take a quick sweep across it and then we'll take a bit more detail in a moment. So right off the bat, there are a selection of floor tiles. These are 12 by 12s, I believe, and they are an unusual aesthetic, let's put it like that. I have a host of tokenry here, so you can see things like effect tokens to let people know when you've got flying, lightning seeds, if you're injured. We have some, these are actually terrain tiles, the Oblivion Wells with red borders, so you can tell what's going on there. There are dials at the front. The dials come in a couple of flavors. You've got your creature tiles for your team, which give you your action points and let you keep track of health points as well. You've got the actual team dials, which are used to keep account on your sphere power. There's a whole range of cards. These are the team cards in the center, but then we also have things like the domain well with these domain shards that can be collected during games to give your individual units buffs. A whole host of multi-part plastic models. Some are individuals, some are multiples of same. So there are things like the big Gugong is a single character, but then when you get down to the little brood creatures at the front, there are sort of 3 of each of those and 3 of each of the things like the Storm Riders and Storm Masters. Over further along, we've got a set of cards. Now there's quite a few cards. There's the skill cards, there's the actual character hero cards, which are the big flat ones. There's the little domain cards, and then we have a whole host of additional tokens for keeping an eye on various statuses, effects, durations within the game. So it's all the bookkeeping part of stuff. So there we have a brief overview of some. Like I say, it's all of the tokens, all of the tiles, but it's not all of the miniatures. Let's take a closer look at some of those pieces in a bit more detail. Okay, so the first thing I want to have a look at are some of the tiles. So Celestial is a take on a science fiction version of a sort of Chinese mythology. So everything has a very oriental feel, mixed with a healthy blend of cyberpunk sci-fi and body horror. The tiles have a similar aesthetic, as you can see. The art design is way out of there. Nothing I have ever seen in my life, which is good because derivative is dull. Now, what I will say is these are early prototypes, so I don't know how close to finished these are planning on being. But what I did find is the actual tiles themselves, on some of them, are a little indistinct for measuring distances. You really have to lean over to get a good idea of where they are. So that's something. I know making the lines more distinct will take away from the artwork. It's not too bad for me if I'm not filming something on camera where it has to be a meter away from me. So when I'm gaming at home, I can obviously sit closer and take a better look at it. But it is just one little thing. There's that, and then there's the domain shard colors as well, are the only 2 things that have really stood out as sort of cons with the actual setup and look of these. But I mean, they really are a very healthy blend of insanity, which, considering some of the stuff Diemension Games have done in the past, very Cthulhu-esque, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of the tokens, which are multitudinous, but I'll do a healthy selection. I thought I'd start off with the domain wheel. So these are domain shards. In the game, they can be extracted from this by using sphere points. and you can only take one, and then the wheel essentially rotates. So if it was on life or on Diemension, which I'm almost certain is not how that's pronounced, and I was to pay the point to take this domain shard from it, I could place it on one of my character cards. Now, there's a sort of a physical and a spiritual half to the wheel. When you take it, you can choose whether you want it to be the spiritual or physical side. So if I was to do this, it would give me life with a additional +1 duration. So anything that has maybe a 3-turn or 2-turn duration, I would get an additional turn for having this on my card, and it's a permanent stat buff. The domain shards are limited based on the quality of the units that you're putting them on. So heroes can have more than champions, who can have more than sort of the minions. But like I say, there's a whole host of them. And these are the other one where some of the colors are a bit close when you're looking for them, and the symbols are very elaborate. Again, when you're looking down close at them, you can see, but when you're just pulling them out of a bag, they tend to blur a bit for me. So that might be something that they can look at between sort of now and production. But this is, like I say, part of the game. So when you're playing, you have 2 sort of pools you can draw from for either tactical or personal actions, if that makes sense. Your team has a sphere pool, which allows them to do things like draw from domain shards or draw extra cards, and then that ticks down, but is used as a resource for your whole side, and it's actually measured with this. So there are 2 of these in the game, both with their own specific artwork. So if I bring in the other, you can see. And what you do is the sphere points of the unit get counted into here, and the scenario will tell you how quickly they regenerate every turn. So you might start with 16, but only regenerate 2 every turn. So you could spend multiples. They get used for initiative as well as for the tactical maneuvers in the game. So at that point, you're going to be then ticking down very quickly if you want to bid high for initiative to make sure you get it. That's where this little dial comes in. So you blind bid at the start of the turn, set your dial to whatever sphere points you're going to be using, and then reveal them at the same time to see who has initiative. So this is a resource for the team. And I quite like the look and the design of the tiles. These feature quite heavily. There are 4 sort of factions or teams that you can build from within the game itself. Okay, so speaking of teams, when you create a team, you can buy a team card. Now, there are different sort of factions like the Guardians of Pangu, the Flesh of Nuwa, things like that. There are 4 of them, and they're defined by sort of a color. So you've got red, brown, blue, and green. And when you choose to put a team together, you can buy one of these, and it will tell you something like this. So if you use this as your team ability, Apex Martial Heart, you'll actually have a maximum sphere point penalty of -4. So even though you may generate 16, you'll only ever have maximum of 12. And the passive effect is when an ally performs a melee attack, it gains +1 AE if able. AE is a buff for when you come to play cards. Depending on the value there, tells you how many cards you can play in a struggle. The more cards you can play, the higher amount of damage you can do, and the more likely you are to do damage. So that's sort of one. Or you could have something like, if I find one that isn't a SP based. There we go. So if we went for this instead, in between life and death, the disrupt effect, when an ally unit is killed, you can spend X sphere points to immediately restore half the hit points equal to the unit's sphere score. So maybe a big unit, a big celestial is worth 6 or 7 sphere points, so it could come back with half its hit points, that sort of thing. And then the cost is obviously the sphere points of it. So a more valuable, that 7-point celestial, will cost you 4 sphere points to get back on the board, but they can be worth their weight in gold when doing so. So those are the team cards. Like I say, you've got the things like Guardians of Pangu, Flesh of Nuwa, Legacy of the Nine Dawns, and the Void of Kunlun. So sort of the factions within the celestial world. Speaking of Gugong, a big 7 sphere point creature, this is one of the sort of the character cards or unit cards. There are no good and bad in Celestials. Everybody is there for their own reason, and there's a substantial lore book that comes with the game. Unfortunately, I don't have the full books, but we'll bring some of the lore stuff up on screen from the sort of the current PDF version to show you. Each of these creatures has a full sort of double page spread or single page, depending on the size of it, explaining who they are, what their purpose is within the celestial realm. It sort of gives you an idea of these wildly unusual deities and what they're like. And it also gives you then the talent tree, which is useful for their skill cards, which we'll take a look at in just one moment. So as you can see, to unlock certain talents within the talent tree, you need to have unlocked the previous talent, or sometimes combinations of multiples, before you can go up tiers. It's very similar to sort of talent trees and tech trees in computer games. To get the best abilities, you've got to work out the best way to unlock them, or depending on the scenario and your opponent, certain abilities will be better for you than others. So maybe playing an AoE heavy set of abilities would be very beneficial if you're playing against an opponent with a lot of small, weaker creatures to stop the sort of swarm coming in. So, moving away from the lore, having a look at Gugong, the Will of the Nine Dawns. You can see the character cards are all set up like this. So they're color-coded, and then at the top corner you have a symbol that designates whether they're a hero or a champion. So their rank within the game, which tells you things like how many of those domain shards that they can stack onto their card for extra bonuses. We have the stats across the top here. So EDE and SDE are your elemental defense enhancement and your spiritual defense enhancement. And when it comes to a struggle, depending on whether you're being attacked by an elemental or spiritual source, that tells you how many additional cards you can flip in the struggle. So some are very weak indeed. They don't have any, so they can't flip any cards. They're very susceptible to certain types of damage. Other ones might be better at elemental or physical, or some are quite balanced. So there are various types of attacks, but they all split into essentially 2 groups of 7. It'll either be 7 elemental types of damage or spiritual. In the middle here we have the hit points, followed by their action points. So hit points are obviously fairly standard. You take off hit points as you take damage. Action points are controlled by their own little dial. So unlike the larger sphere point dial, this one is unique to each creature or each unit. They're numbered, so if you have multiples of the same type, like Candela or the little Cereborn bugs, you can then use a number token on their base so that you can tell who's 1, 2, and 3, and so on. It's also handy for the AI, because the AI will activate them in numerical order if you happen to be playing a solo or cooperative game. So here we have a twin dial, which is used for the actual hit points. And then at the top, we have the action points. So he would have 6 to begin with. Obviously counts down as you activate various abilities. If you get to 0, it doesn't mean the turn's over, because you can still spend sphere points for tactical things, to draw an extra card, to unlock an ability. When you are completely finished, you put that little activated symbol up so that people can see that that's done and dusted. So that's how that little dial works. Finally, we have the speed on the top. So that tells you how many squares you move when you play per action point. So Gugong could spend all 6 action points to move 6 times, each one moving 1 square, or any combination. There's no diagonal movement, it's all orthogonal in this, so movement is relatively restrained, which means when you do get somebody who can move a large distance through flight or through leaping, it can really change up how the game plays. At the bottom here we have the team information. So in the middle is the sphere points. That's essentially your cost, both the cost of the creature and how many sphere points it will give you. If you decide to play like a PvP game, you can make up a team and set it, so maybe play 15 points aside, and then this tells you, obviously 7 points leaves you with 8 more to spend, so you could go for another big hitter or some smaller ones. On these symbols, these are the 4 factions from the team cards, and it tells you the cost you have to pay, rather, the cost you have to pay to include them in a team in sphere points. So if you're mixing and matching units that shouldn't be together, then you'll find it will cost you more to put it into a team with members of another faction. And that way you've got game balance, so it helps stop people using sort of broken lists where taking somebody from the Void of Kunlun and then taking somebody from the Flesh of Nuwa. Obviously there are extremes of the 2 sides, so it does that. This little symbol here means you cannot mix, or you cannot be taken in a team from the Legacy of the Nine Dawns. So there we have that. Keywords at the bottom for abilities and attributes. Each one of the models comes with a card, so if there are multiple models, you get multiple cards so that you can keep track of status effects and the like on there. They also come with a set of ability cards or skill cards, and at the start of a game, all the tier 1 skills are unlocked. So you can see there's the tier 1 skills, and it tells you here whether they are unique actions, attack actions, and when you're resolving them, they go from top to bottom. So, for example, Mind Grinder targets an enemy within range. It's range 3. It costs 2 action points. It will do 2 psychic damage with an AE of 2, so you could flip 2 cards if you so desire to increase that in the struggle. The effect is Gugong may spend sphere points to increase the damage above, spending 1 sphere point for each point of increased damage, no more than 3. And it can be done once per activation. So some have limits and some have capacities, which will tell you how many times per activation you can do it. However, from turn 2 onwards, you can start to unlock the new cards. So tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and some of the Celestials cap out at tier 4. Others, like Gugong, go all the way up to tier 5. And depending on what you're doing, you may want to go for certain unlocks of these. You can only do 1 per turn. And like I say, to unlock some, as per the lore book, you have to have unlocked others previously. And then there's also the domain cards. So when you build your team, you build a domain deck, which will contain 1 copy of each of their cards. So if you've got 2 of the same model, then you'll have 2 copies of each of their cards. And sometimes you'll also be able to add wild cards, which are just a generic domain card like this. There are 2 ways to play this. So in a struggle, they can be played as the EA. So these are the cards you flip or play to buff. The red is elemental and the blue is spiritual, and then you just add them up. So if somebody was defending against one of his incoming attacks, you would just see who is the highest at the end of it. So that's one way of doing it. So if I played those 2 for that 3 point of damage card, it actually end up being 6 points, less the defense of whatever my opponent put up against him. The other thing you can do, as it says here, is to discard it from your hand to use the effect on it, the ability. So when played for a hero unit, this card gains +1 EV or SV, so elemental or spiritual. Or here we can see when played for an attack, if you win the struggle, the enemy loses 1 sphere point and you restore 1. So in these little cards, you've got a whole slew of ways you can sort of play within the game itself. So that's the sort of the card component and the list building side. So you can play in several different ways. You can play PvE and PvP. There's an AI in the cooperative version available as well, which are all within the rulebook. So let's have a look at some of the models. Okay, so starting off with the build instructions. They are multi-part unipose plastics. The instructions are extensive and pretty good. Once or twice I had a little bit of an issue where I was having to dry fit things to try and work out exactly the orientation of some of the individual parts. But as you can see with the Dengbi, it goes through building sub-assemblies, and then when the sub-assembly is complete, it's given a new value and it tells you how to add that to the model as well. And then at the end, what base size it goes on. Important for game purposes. If we take a look at the sprue for the Dengbi, so this is actually half of the sprue. So the top half here, as listed, tells you where it's from. So every sprue is listed. You won't have to go jumping from parts of the sprue to other parts of the sprue unless the whole sprue is for one monster or one celestial. So here, this is actually 3 in 1. We have the top half is all the components for the Dengbi. This quarter at the bottom is the Candela, and then this last quarter is for the Nucho. Yes, I'm going to go with Nucho. So all of the components are sectioned off, so you won't have to go looking for them. Sprue gates are very small. That's sometimes an issue with multi-part models like this, where the sprue gate is a bit larger than you'd want it to be. But overall, the quality of casting and production on these is absolutely sublime. If we have a look at the big guy, Gugong, he actually comes on 2 sprues, and this shows you the sort of elements you're dealing with. So everything's numbered and the sprues are labeled. So if you're looking for piece 31 for a specific model, there's only one place it will be, and that is on the model sprues. So you don't have to worry about duplications. Again, with this big swirl at the bottom that holds his punt raft boat. I'm not entirely certain what it is. Flying pea pod. It caused me issues. I had to dry fit it several times before I worked out exactly how the 4 components of the swirl went together, because it's like a complicated 3D jigsaw. But again, the model did go together and ended up looking like this. And it's an absolute monster. As you can see here, that sort of torrent whirlwind that holds it aloft. Remarkable design in and of itself. Like I say, they have an unusual sci-fi fantasy body horror aesthetic. So when I was painting a few for some Let's Plays, I used a lot of washes and sort of airbrushing, because everything's sort of nebulous, as you can see from the artwork in the rulebook and the lore book. It's all very sort of watercolor inspired. Definitions are very loose to give that sort of otherworldly feel, but it's just such an interesting concept and design that I really love what they've done with it. Another interesting thing that they've done is the recessed or rebatement in the bottom of the base for these large bases which are needed for gameplay. They all have their own designs on the corners, and on the base they have a design to tell you what team it is, which means when you get these, you can paint them up in slightly different ways and then either color code them or mark them off in some other fashion. So if you're building a team for a PvP game and you're taking the legacy of the 9 Dawns, then you can very quickly look down and just see the base, what coloration you've put on it to know who belongs to who. So he's an absolute stormer. There's just too many of these to show. From this Naga-esque, who's, I don't know if they're casting a spell or if that's a strand of DNA. In the artwork, it certainly looks like DNA. But again, it's sort of that blend of mysticism and far future high-tech science. These are an absolute gorgeous set of figures for painters, for people just playing a board game. These are incredible. Just chucking down some washes and the like and move on with your life, great way to go. But for people who want to actually do something at a whole other level, then I think these are just to die for. And again, just so unusual within the realms of fantasy itself. Very quickly have a look at a couple of the ones I've thrown paint on. So this is one of the Savachi, the cacophonies. And I've decided to go with that sort of blend of flesh and metal. So there are places where this could be sort of anything, but I decided those would be sort of little sort of flecks of metal, maybe nanotechnology, maybe armor, maybe just whatever you want them to be. It does describe in the book their pale, milky eyes. They have one massive proper eye and then the rest are sort of milky and empty. Because I was just using washes, I didn't. I ended up just dotting them all as eyes. Yeah, that's me. But it's just such a fun project to play around with things like this, or with the eyeless Wiccan. Again, this unusual fantasy creature creeping forward, but with a whole range of cyberpunk-esque technology growing into its body. Yeah, they're an unusual set of figures and a really inspiring one as well. Not the regular fantasy that we all too often see. So there we have it, a veritable cornucopia for Diemension Games, Celestial, the Hidden Void. Should be on Kickstarter very soon, and keep your eye out for Let's Play where myself and Shay take on some filthy storm riders in a creepy metal landscape. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below. If you have any comments to make, please feel free to drop those as well. Let me know what you think of the miniatures. I absolutely adore them. Justin's on the fence. They don't seem to appeal to his aesthetic, but I love the completely left field aspect that they've gone with. So there we have it, folks. Until next time, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.